But we're optimistic because Twining Properties has been one of the key developers in Kendall Square, and they've done significant housing elements there. They've been great stewards of the open space and have helped create some of the most creative retail in that area. So we feel good. We've begun conversations with them. Bob Flack from Twining is going to be here. He's on the Kendall Square committee. And we know that they've got CBT on board recently to start working with them on the planning, and they've agreed to kind of be our test balloon and test some of the zoning principles on their site. So we think that's great because when we do zoning based on a planning study, it's really rare for us to have that opportunity to do that real-time testing, and we've been able to do that with Kendall, with MIT, and then we'll have a chance to test things with the West parcels in Central Square. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Jeff, who will walk us through the zoning principles. The one change is that even though your memo starts out with Kendall Square, today we'd like to start with Central Square, and then we'll come back to Kendall a little bit once we are done with Central.
Okay, before we go there, I'd actually like to discuss process. Because I think the question is, do we buy into this timeline? Is this the proper way to do this? What are the priorities between the different portions of work? And the board has actually had some considerable discussion about the process in Kendall Square, and which has not been reflected in your schedule. And I think so where I see this being now is that we should be moving forward very expeditiously in Central Square, taking the time in the deliberation process to coordinate with Twining and have them give us their insight, because they're now more involved. I think the board was very impressed by both the substance of the Kendall Square report, the recommendations, and the public response to that. I think we're anxious to proceed forward, at least I'm anxious to proceed forward and get that enacted so that we can move forward. In Kendall Square, we felt last fall that there were too many questions about some of the sectors to move forward with them. And specifically, the specific thing that's happened is that the Cambridge Redevelopment Authority has changed from being a board-less entity with an executive director who was really clearly, sort of at the end of his tenure. Now there's a board. The board consists of people who are highly respected in the community. I think two of them are actually on the K2 committee. Barry Zevin was, I'm not sure.
Barry was on the PCAPS committee.
Okay, so, and it seems to me that we need to not go forward until this sister board is ready and able to go with us. My recommendation would be to, before we go much farther in Kendall Square, we have a joint meeting with the redevelopment board, that we actually tonight vote to ask them to have a joint meeting, I believe they would be receptive to meeting with us in April. I think I would put an invitation out as a, not a specific date or time. I think our people and their people can figure out what the best way to do it is. I think there's just simply too many unknowns, and this is a board that's trying to get their hands around it and determine what their role is. And we should grant them the same deference we grant to every other board and commission in the city, which is to work with them, not work in as if they didn't exist. That will help us accomplish what we want.
Mr. Chair, may I ask for two things? First, I'd like for you to tell me what would your intended outcome be, best intended outcome of such a meeting between these boards? And then I would ask Brian if you could respond and tell what you think about that and how that fits into what we're doing.
I think the purpose of the meeting would be to come up with a timeline and schedule for getting the zoning recommendations out. One that would work for us and would work for them together. I think that's the goal. But probably a secondary goal of just people putting out on the table and introducing themselves. But I don't think they have much to fear from us. I don't think we have much to fear from them. The meetings help calm that situation.
The only comment I would make is that I know we never take political considerations into account, but this is an election year. And that ought to be borne in mind as we figure out the timing, because renewing these petitions has its own problems. So I think we want to keep at least some peripheral vision on that. I think that is a reason to move ahead rather than not. We have the benefit of one counselor who won't be with us after the end of the year, and there may be reasons for moving ahead. Pretty good reasons.
Right, I think council loves to enact legislation that everybody's behind. And since that seems to be pretty much the case in Central Square, that's why I would put a priority on that to make sure that moves forward as quickly as possible. If and when we find that's true of the other sectors in Kendall Square, then we should be prepared to move forward.
Makes a lot of sense.
I'm not sure this is the right time to raise it, but we're setting out a fairly adventurous schedule, and I know there have been some pushback of the fact that we've been meeting 3 times a month rather than what had been our standard of 2 times a month. And I'm just wondering whether we and staff envision that the 3 times a month is going to become the rule rather than the exception, and whether everybody is prepared for that, or whether there is some way of organizing the work both on this and our other projects so that it is not a 3 times a month situation.
I'm really hoping we can get Central Square to the council well before June.
The middle income housing provision is very similar to what was discussed in Kendall Square, where any development above and beyond the current limitations in the district would require a portion of that to be to reserve for households of middle income, typically 80 to 120% of the area-wide median income. And in this case, there would be a particular focus on providing family size units, or 2 or 3 bedroom units of enough of a size that they could accommodate families with children. The parking and loading requirements would actually, we would take a similar approach to, or the recommendation was to take a similar approach to what's being done in Kendall Square, which is to impose some maximum parking limitations and then allow flexibility to go below the minimum, to allow the planning board to approve things below the minimum. It actually is the case now that the planning board, for existing buildings, the planning board can approve lower parking as a part of the existing Central Square overlay there. Right. So in the heart of Central Square, the maximum for residential would be 140 feet, which could be, and I may not have pointed this out, but could increase if there is a transfer of development rights. The planning board, in approving that, can approve an increase in height to accommodate the transfer of development of up to 20 additional feet.
So we're talking 160 would be the max.
Yep.
And can that occur also for residential in the Osborne Triangle?
Yes, it could be in the Osborne Triangle it would be 160, and then an additional 20-foot increase if there's a transfer of development rights to 180.
Could I also pick up on your desire to kind of focus on Central Square? I think we could hold off on having any more discussion on Kenwood. I think that's a good idea. And maybe we could hear from the board, your reaction to kind of process going forward now. You've heard Aaron's kind of overview and Jeff's laying out Central Square strategy. Maybe, what do you think about that? Maybe it's better to do that rather than getting it clouded up with more Kendall, since we maybe have Kendall fatigue from having just done the MIT rezoning.
I think we all sort of nodding our heads thinking it's a good idea. Let's roll up our sleeves and get down to work. We usually, we make notes, we make questions, and then we'd like to hear from other people, and then we like to consider those comments. Is that a good procedure now?
It's okay here.
Here, I might want to add that since this was advertised also, Kendall Square included, if there's anyone from Kendall Square who'd like to hear from them as well. Just not that we want to talk about it, but if they're here to do some specific thing, comments on Kendall Square. Would you be open to that?
I would actually not be very interested in hearing comments about details that we haven't had presented to us.
Okay.
In Kendall Square, if there's a procedural question or a suggestion, I think that would be very, very welcome.
So one other thing, to respond to your question, is that we actually, Sue and Adam actually did an analysis of the usage of the parking lots, because when we started out, we thought Central Square has more parking in terms of the amount of business than even Harvard Square. Of course, we should be able to get rid of some of it. But when they did the utilization analysis, they found that while during the day there is a lot of capacity, at night all those parking spaces are full. And they're not full of residents because they actually also cross-referenced license plates with Cambridge address registrations in Cambridge. And so there is a need for that parking right now, and we're not proposing, the committee is not proposing eliminating the parking, it's just reconfiguring it so that all the land gets released for great things, and it gets smooth. But
There are many of these questions that have been raised tonight that are really the plan, the vision. I think what Jeff was laying out was the zoning piece of that, and obviously we want there to be as strong a connection as possible. This is going to be something that takes years to happen. That's with any one of our plans. So I think the new thing that's pretty exciting and very positive about what's come out of this committee process is a desire for the housing, for really trying to, I think Mark said, it's time to get off the status quo, and we heard that pretty loud and clear. So I think what we're going to be getting from the zoning isn't going to solve all those problems, and things like the land disposition and what to do with parking lots clearly is going to be a process in and of itself. But I'm feeling like what Jeff presented is a pretty good translation. I didn't hear anything from the folks who are here tonight. Admittedly, it's just those who were able to come, but I didn't hear anything that seemed terribly contradictory. I think there was Saul in particular saying we weren't hard enough on the parking issue, and certainly that's something the board has been wanting to do anyways, cut back on parking. So I think I'm feeling like we're in a pretty good position to move forward, but as you think about it, any other thoughts you have, the things that seem needing clarity, we'll be happy to work with you.
Well, I'm taking the silence to mean two things. One is that it's zoning rights of the town. And secondly, that it's really an endorsement of what we've heard tonight and the direction that is being taken. And the committee process was very convincing to us. And what we learned of it is also very convincing. My things I brought up are really almost at the level of footnotes. So, are you complete with this?
I have a question.
Yeah.
And that question is, what, pardon me if I'm being a little thick, but from this point on the central square things, what does moving forward look like? What is it? What are we going to do next?
I think it's going to go from a checklist to language.